Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. I'm Halise Lieberman, and it is my pleasure as the director of the Toby Center for Jewish Life and Learning to welcome you to our TJHT Talk session. Tonight, we are honored to host Professors Jeffrey Shandler and Karolina Szymaniak in what promises to be an intriguing discussion about the survival and revival of Yiddish in Poland and its impact on contemporary Polish and Polish Jewish culture. Our program will last an hour. The 45-minute conversation will be followed by 15 minutes, 45 as we'd like, for Q&A. If you'd like to let us know where you are at the moment, or submit a question, or send a greeting, please do so in the comment section. And we also invite you to suggest topics that you would like our series to address in the future. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our guests. Jeffrey Shandler is a distinguished professor of Jewish studies at Rutgers University. He is the author, editor, or translator of 16 books, most recently, the widely acclaimed publication Yiddish, Biography of a Language. Jeffrey is currently a visiting research fellow at the Center for Jewish History in New York and is a member of our Scholars Advisory Committee. Karolina Szymaniak is an assistant professor of Yiddish studies at the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw and at Wrocław University Taube Jewish Center Department. She is an academic advisor to the Center for Yiddish Culture in Warsaw, a researcher, editor, translator, and language instructor. She is also on staff at the Zuzanna Ginczanka High School in Warsaw. And so, without further ado, Jeffrey, the mic is yours to share with Karolina.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Halise. I want to thank you for inviting me and, of course, Karolina as well to be a part of the Toby Center Talks. And also thanks to Jakub and Kaya for all their assistance. And I'm especially delighted to be having this conversation today with Karolina. I don't know anyone who would be a better choice to talk about what's going on with Yiddish in Poland today, and looking back into the past, and also maybe even looking into the future. So, Karolina, maybe we should start by having you describe the scope of what's going on with Yiddish in Poland today, and
Okay.
Take it from there.
Wow. Yeah, that's a broad question. Thank you, Jeffrey. It's a pleasure to be here and to be talking to you. And thank you to Toby Center for organizing this event. And thank you to everybody who is here. And I can't see you, but I'm excited that you're here. So yeah, I mean, Yiddish in Poland today is a very broad topic and we can discuss it in various areas. First and foremost, in the academia. So Yiddish studies is really one of the most important part of the Jewish studies scene in Poland. A scene that, really a field that is developing and has been developing for the past 25, 30 years. And we really see that from a small group of scholars who were taught by none other than Professor Honeš Meruk, who came to Poland to teach after 1989, to teach the new generation of Polish Yiddishists. Now we have really Yiddish taught at all the most important universities in Poland, in Warsaw, in Krakow, in Lublin, in Poznań, of course, in my at my university in Wrocław, and there are also new centers in Gdańsk and in Szczecin. Not that the scope is smaller, but we see that there is an interest in the academia. We have students, we have scholars, and important research projects that we might be perhaps have time to talk about later on. But then we also have Yiddish, in the realm of, let's say, art theater, music, and visual arts, performance. In what we've seen in the past two, perhaps 3 decades, is really also a growing interest in a new engagement with Yiddish within the realm of art, of the certain of experimentation. So it moves from really engaging with traditional genres of Yiddish music, such as klezmer, to something more experimental nowadays. And we see that there are musicians that experiment with Yiddish as a part of their really broader experimental projects. And also, when it comes to visual arts, we also see that there are contemporary Polish artists who take, are interested in Yiddish as a means of expression, as one possible tool of their experimentation with contemporary context. And here comes another context, which is the political context. And we've seen in the past few years, what's happening today in Poland. We see, a growing really wave of nationalism. And one of the ways to really answer to what's happening today in Poland is to engage also, not exclusively, with Yiddish as a part of the political landscape, but also, cityscape, perhaps I should say, or manifestationscape, because in the past few years, really, we've seen more and more demonstrations, anti-nationalistic demonstrations, and Yiddish appears there as a visual sign of anti-nationalist, of another agenda, of another way of thinking what Polish politics and Polish identity today can be. And for example, perhaps we can also come back to all these issues later on, but we really, so from such banners as Der Faschizm wird nicht dadurch, to really names, so for example, one of the main new left parties in Poland, they published their logo in different minority languages in Poland, and one of them was also Yiddish. Yet another, and I should have perhaps mentioned it as the first issue here, is Yiddish as a minority language in Poland. So Yiddish is recognized as a minority language in Poland and is protected by the law. And also the state is obliged to support Yiddish media. We had a Yiddish radio. It's not, it was closed a few years ago, but there was something that was called Naya Chwalies. But Yiddish press, Yiddish radio or television, if there would be somebody who wants to have a Yiddish TV, the state is officially obliged to support it financially. Also, Yiddish is supported as a minority language in school. So at my school, which is Zuzanna Ginczanka High School, Jewish high school in Warsaw, we are teaching Yiddish as a part of our curriculum, and this is also supported by the state. And all the all the minority organizations, including Jewish organizations, can apply for different grants to develop different projects connected to Yiddish, that connect Yiddish to contemporary Jewish culture and identity. Those projects that really help support Jewish community in Poland and make Yiddish part of the contemporary Jewish culture.
That's it's a remarkable range of activities. It's really, I think, for many people surprising to hear so much going on, different spheres of activity, different levels of support. And I wonder if you could tell us, who's involved in this in terms of, the age groups or professional interests or ideologies or, different regions of Poland, what is it that is bringing them to the language? What are the different interests that draw people to getting involved one way or another with Yiddish?
A few years ago, I did not a very professional sociological query, but I can give you also a few numbers. First numbers come from the state. So this is the census. This year there was a new census, but we don't have the data from this year's census. So I can only give you the data from the 2011 census. So we have altogether 90 Yiddish speakers in Poland. In 2002, it was 37, so the number is growing, not diminishing. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, 27 of them identify as Poles, 37 identify as Poles and Jews, 25 identify as Jews. only. So we have different identities connected to this. And this also shows you, I mean, it's 27 Poles, 25 Jews, and 38 Poles and Jews, I mean, people who identify as both. So it shows you that, people who are engaged with Yiddish today are Poles and Jews, but mostly these are non-Jewish Poles, actually. Which is interesting. I mean, these are scholars or students that are interested mainly in Jewish history, but also in literature. And in recent years, also people who are interested in gender studies. For example, gender Yiddish studies became an important part of the Yiddish field. Of the field of Yiddish studies in Poland, and we say a growing number of people who simply are interested in the questions of gender, history of women and men. So and understand that to study this in the Polish context, it means also engaging with minority cultures, including the Yiddish culture. So that's one thing. Scholars and also historians who study. I mean, mostly these are scholars of Jewish history, but we see also, and this is a new development, people who study Polish history understand that some sources are in Yiddish, and they can't, write about, I don't know, rural, I don't know, whatever, the history of Polish economics without Yiddish, in some respects. So there are also people whose main interest is not Jewish studies, but simply Polish history in a broad sense. In a broader sense. So this is academia. Then we have people who want to connect to their heritage, and they want to do it. I mean, the so-called Jewish revival, we still keep talking about Jewish revival, but this is simply, Jewish community and culture in contemporary Poland, was more connected with the rejection of Yiddish after post-1989. Why was that? Because Yiddish was officially, to a certain moment, sponsored by the communist state, while Hebrew was not. And then the remnants of Yiddish culture that were performed in the late 70s and 90s were not attractive for this new community that was being formed in post 1989 Poland. So, but then we saw different exciting projects. I want to talk, and then I want to show you things. I'm not sure how to do it, so I'll be talking, and perhaps at a certain moment I'll show you a lot of pictures simply to just illustrate whatever I was talking about. So, for example, we see in the last few years, the Jewish youth organizations engage in different ways with Yiddish. One of them was Truland in Krakow, which is an organization of, this was originally a student organization, that now we have a different organization in Krakow, but Truland still exists. And they started publishing bilingual books for children in Yiddish and in Polish, beautifully illustrated and modernly edited. These books were available for free for members of the Jewish community and for educators, and they're still available for free, and you can download them. They're not as beautiful as the printed version. One of the books in the series got the Bologna Ragazzi Prize for the most beautiful children's book. In general, not a Yiddish book, not a Jewish book, just because they're so beautiful. And the last volume in the series was edited in 3 languages: Yiddish, Polish, and English. So for those of you who are interested, please go to Maise, and it's written with a J, not a Y, .pl, I think, or truland.pl. I will write it perhaps here, and check it out. It's a private chat, so perhaps somebody can put it on in the chat for everybody to see. And now we have in Warsaw also a youth, children's or youth organization called Jung Warszawa. So Yiddish comes back as a part of the Jewish heritage and contemporary Polish Jewish culture. So that's another development. Then we have people who are interested in, for example, in urban history, tour guides sometimes. So they want, to make their tours, their work more exciting. So these are not scholars, but people who work with history in their different roles, and they're interested in Yiddish. We saw also, we have, for example, audio guides in the Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews, also in Yiddish, but this this comes not as such a big surprise, though. It's, you would probably think that Hebrew would be more popular, which it is, but still, it's natural for Pauline to have a Yiddish audio guide. But also the Museum of Warsaw, and the a part of Museum of Warsaw in the district of Praga, which was really also an important. Praga is not the Czech Prague, but that part of Warsaw
Right.
called Praga. So an important place in the Jewish history of Warsaw has also an audio guide in Yiddish. And there, this is not only made just as a gesture, for the bygone past. There are people actually coming to the museum and they're using these audio guides. So not a lot of people, but yet again, that there is a group that really, that is a target for such audio guides. So museums, tour guides, etc., artists. We have a Jewish theater in Warsaw that becomes more and more exciting, and this is a new development. The State Jewish Theater, now just Jewish Theater, sponsored by the state and the city of Warsaw. It's a public institution, and this is the institution that really stages plays in Yiddish as well. And it had a very specific repertoire, very folklore dependent, and sometimes the representations were very stereotypical, so many people were avoiding the theater, although they were attending it, and going to the theater as children. I remember myself going to the theater and listening to Yiddish in the headphones. But right now it became a very exciting place with new directors coming to work with the theater. So the director, the Golda Tenzer, invites a lot of new young directors to work on different projects, and some of them are also Yiddish. Recently, this was Der Sturm, so the Tempest, called Zwischen also. So in between. So this was an experimental project by a Krakow-based Jewish Polish director. So there are these new projects. But this is a Jewish theater, so a specific Jewish institutions. But there are other also places where Yiddish is introduced as a part of different artistic projects. These are theaters, these are movies, and visual arts. And these are artists that sometimes they ask for help, and sometimes they want to go deeper and learn the language, or learn it in a way so they can understand what's going on in what they're singing, in what they're doing on the stage, or what they're painting, or whatever. So this is another group. And then political activists, and sometimes you have this artivism, this art that becomes also political activity. And I would like to mention here Susanna Herzberg, who is a Jewish performer and visual artist who engages with Yiddish in her different political and artivist performances. This would be, and then you have simply people who are interested in languages and they want to learn yet another language. That can also be a reason. So Yiddish is an interesting language, of course.
It's quite a spread, and it's so interesting that it is. It's a range of generations, not only different impulses, but the extent to which Yiddish is something venerable and takes you to the past, but also Yiddish is something that's forward moving, and that it's avant-garde, and that it's alternative, and that it's critical. And it's very interesting to see, both of those trends playing out in what you described. Do you want to show some images now? Because it sounds like you have pictures of what you've been talking about.
I really want. I'm not sure if I am able to do it. So what I'm
going to try.
I'm gonna share something, and you will see probably. Okay. I can't share. Okay, I have to share my whole screen. I guess that's bad. Okay. Yeah, that's my bad. I'll try to. Okay, let me do this.
Okay.
I'll take risks. If it's terrible, I'll stop. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen. Okay, yep. Yeah. Okay, so right now you can see my computer probably. Yeah. Okay. Can you see my presentation?
I can't. I don't know if anybody else can.
Oh, that's too bad. Okay, so if you can't, because I'm sharing it right now.
Okay.
I'm not sure if we have feedback from the audience. If not, okay. So
Well, maybe one of our support people can tell us what to do. But in the meantime, while we're seeing that, so we have other things that we want to talk about, and I think we have this very, very interesting range of things going on that's of the moment. But maybe you can fill us in, even if it's in a sort of a broad way, about how the place of Yiddish in Poland has changed since the early post-World War II period, and especially this, very important turning point in Polish history of 1989 into the 1990s. So what would somebody back in the late 1940s or in 1990 be surprised by, because Yiddish was different in such a different place earlier in this history?
okay. Wow, that's a tough one. Yeah. All right. So if we go back to the immediate post-war period and the late 1940s, Yiddish is a living culture in Poland. Spoken by the community. Of course, it's decimated. It's clear, but there's still, Yiddish institutions, Yiddish schools, orphanages, papers, a publishing house, different community organizations, education on different levels. It's not only Yiddish that is used. Of course, a lot of people who survived, especially the younger generation, doesn't know Yiddish at that time, because, this was a matter of survival, so not knowing Yiddish. So the kids that survived and they came back, either in Poland or mostly coming back from the Soviet Union, they don't speak necessarily Yiddish, but then, and that's also a matter of a constant debate whether we should educate our children in Yiddish. So many of those who survive do not speak the language, but there is a substantial group that speaks the language. And also, the movement of the population is to the west, to the new territories that were incorporated in the new Poland. So Poland lost its eastern territories and got the western territories, previously belonging to Germany. And this is Lower Silesia, and there you have a really, like, a whole community, a whole Yiddish land, post-war Yiddish land, in which is called the Yiddish Reichschaft in Niederschlesia, with like you can if you want to imagine a Yiddish speaking place in post-war Poland, so you would go to Lower Silesia. Of course, Warsaw is an important center still. Lodz, right after the war, it's Lodz, not Warsaw. Warsaw is totally destroyed.
Right.
And then this culture develops. In a communist country, with a communist regime, it's a communist regime, but there is a certain amount of freedom until really 1949, 1950. But still, even after that moment, after that period, we still have Jewish organizations using Yiddish, and Yiddish is language that is promoted, not Hebrew. And Yiddish schools, a Yiddish publishing house, Yiddish Buch, etc., etc. But what is also interesting and important is that Yiddish literature is being translated and is becomes part of mainstream culture. Not in a, it's not a mass phenomenon, but I'm showing you here a very old edition of Yitzhak Leib Peretz's short stories, edited in a very prestigious series of the National Library. It's where the best, it's where you edit Shakespeare. It's where you edit Byron, and you have Byron, Shakespeare, Goethe, Pushkin, and Peretz. So this is really, like, it's included in the central series and the very prestigious series. So this is, Yiddish becomes part of the canon.
And what year was that book published?
This is 1950s, and it's edited with I will check the 1958. This is already post-Stalinist period, after 1950 1953. So this is the period 1949, 1953, not a very happy period, the darkest period of Stalinism in the region. This is 1958, edited with a introduction of Bermark. It has this, like Soviet touch to it, or Soviet. I mean, so he's discussing Peretz's social realism, etc., etc. But still, it's something that did not happen in the interwar period. Yiddish becomes part of the world literature. Here, and also some Yiddish authors, including Sholem Aleichem, are published in not only by a Jewish publishing house. This is a major development, but by main publishing houses in Poland, the most prestigious ones, with introductions by not only like here by Bermark, an important Yiddish historian, but also at a certain moment also the director at that time of the Jewish Historical Institute, but also such authors as this name will tell you won't tell you anything, but it's Jarosław Iwaszkiewicz, so one of the really central figures on the Polish literary scene. So he writes an introduction to Sholem Aleichem. This is incredible. I mean, this really is incredible. This stops, of course. Yiddish schools, Yiddish publishing scene. And translations of Yiddish literature. There is an anthology prepared of Yiddish poetry, prepared by Solomon Wastik and Arnold Słucki. Beautiful anthology, and the translators there are such people as Wisława Szymborska. Later she got the Nobel Prize. So really, again, that's like really trying to put Yiddish into the canon. They're trying to put Yiddish into the canon, but 1968 comes. Of course, it doesn't come suddenly. There is a process behind that. But for example, this publication, this poetry, this anthology is not published until 1983. So it was ready before that, but 1968 and the expulsion of Jews from Poland and the anti-Semitic campaign really brings an end to an era. Yiddish was not what it had been before the Second World War, but it was. There was a Yiddish-speaking community, a Yiddish-speaking word, and Yiddish was becoming, in this socialist style, but becoming a part of the word canon here in Poland. And after 1968, slowly Yiddish becomes like a part of the counterculture, which is an interesting development. So Yiddish, and also discussing, of course, Jewish history. This is something that is not possible in the public sphere. There's still, you have to imagine that most people who left also didn't speak Yiddish, and there are still people who speak Yiddish who stayed in Poland, including Yiddish writers, not many of them, but some of them. In Szczecin, for example, it's Ilyohu Reisman. And there's, Yiddish still is there in Poland, not prominently. There are no schools. You cannot, learn Yiddish, but there's the Jewish theater is still there as well. So it's a not an important part of the mainstream culture, but it's still there. But what is important is the counterculture. So people start being interested precisely because you cannot discuss Jewish history in the public sphere. There are many things that you can discuss the Polish writers, but not many issues in Polish Jewish history, and not certainly what happened in 1968. So slowly we see Polish artists, Polish intellectuals who are interested in Yiddish, to the point that this is really somehow even, I would say, funny, that it because some people say, well, that's enough. We have enough of it. When the revolution of 1989 comes, or before, it comes also with the revolution in literature, in cultural practices. One author, which is at that time one of the most revolutionary poets, he says, like, okay, they always have to talk about Wasilewska, Cyprian Kamil Norwid, so important figures in the Polish history, Józef Piłsudski, Ukraine, Lithuania, Thomas Mann, the Bible, all of these they have discussed, and at the end, a little something in Yiddish. So it tells you a lot. This little something in Yiddish, of course, it's interesting because he mentions Ukraine, Thomas Mann very precisely, and this is, Yiddish, and that's what happened. It is a sign of a culture, but a sign that is somehow lacking really denotation, concrete denotation. It has a lot of connotations, but it's something Yiddish, but we don't know what exactly. But for example, in the 1980s, the opposition publishes a translation of the book. Andrzej Wajda does really prepares the staging. Also, he works in Israel later on. So there is this interest, but interest also with these, the most sometimes the most stereotypical parts of Yiddish culture. So if we think, the book is important because it helps. This is also something that keeps haunting Polish and Jewish identity, and it is a figure. The book is a symbol and a figure of haunting, and Polish history is in for many haunted by Jewish ghosts. So these artists engage precisely with the book for that, with the book for that reason. But and then we come to 1983, and that's post martial law, and the state wants to change their PR for international peer, and all of a sudden they start supporting Yiddish again, and this beautiful anthology I mentioned is published all of a sudden. So Yiddish is used, Yiddish, and also other publications in Jewish history. Yiddish is a part of a broader phenomenon, is used for PR reasons. And then 1989 comes, and this is incredible. People want to read, they want to know what was before, what had been before forbidden. So they want to know all of it. And all of a sudden, Yiddish translations of Yiddish literature start selling in crazy, really now amounts of copies. It's like 200,000 copies of Sholem Aleichem. Can you imagine? And this is incredible. That's Tevye der Milcher, and then also Mendele is published. All the classics. There is a new series of translations of all the classics, and then we see that there is this interest really maybe does not disappear, but becomes normalized somehow, if we can use this word here. So from 200,000 copies, we go to 20,000, and we finish somewhere at 1,000 copies. Of course, today, more or less 2,000 to 1,000 copies of a standard edition of a Yiddish author. In the somewhere in between. So between the 1989 and the communist period is the Nobel Prize for I.B. Zinger. And I say I.B. Zinger, not Yitzhak Bashevis, because it is I.B. Zinger that is translated and promoted. So the English version of the Yiddish modern, well, let's call him classic. I'm not so fond of him, but he is a classic already. Let's give him this. So yes, so for many, Zinger becomes a symbol of the past lost, and this is like turning to past to go forward. So if you want to imagine possible Polish future post-communist period, you want to turn to the past that is idealized, but the past, the shtetl past, the imagined shtetl past, and people read really shtetl stories as if they were mimetic, realistic. Mimetic really stories. Accurate representations of the past. And this, framework, which is, an international phenomenon, reading, and you know it better than I do. Really lens through which the whole Yiddish culture is seen. Sometimes it's incredible because such urban novel as Israel Rabon's The Street is read as a shtetl story, which is like, it happens. It's such a terribly modernist, Zimelesque novel.
It's such
an super urban. It's really, it's like staging all the problems of urban modernity in one tiny novel, which I love, actually. Yeah. And which was supposed to be staged at the Jewish Theater in a French-Polish exciting cooperation, stopped by COVID, which I hope it will still happen.
Oh.
So these stories are still read through, the shtetl lens, which is somehow, and this, and through the through this image of a culture and word lost forever, which is a folkloristic word of the shtetl. and I was really surprised. I have a whole folder of these reviews of different Yiddish books by different authors. The internet is a great source for that, and it's incredible how strong this stereotype was. So, but there was this, imagined peaceful but multi-ethnic paradise lost, the paradise of Polish culture Second World War, that became an inspiration for many people to think forward what Poland should be. And this was, supporting anti-nationalist agenda, and thinking about Poland as a modern contemporary democracy. So in this sense, this conservative turn to the past was a progressive one, although it was really somehow framing Yiddish as something that it is. I mean, it was not, and playing with many stereotypes. And until today, these stereotypes and this framework is not only in Poland, is the most important framework through which you interpret Yiddish culture. And that's why Yiddish was rejected also as a means or a part of the Jewish revival. Why would you go to this conservative or strange folksy culture? Funny.
It's very interesting how these developments, to some extent, they're very distinctive to the Polish context, especially the role of the government along the way and reacting against state policy. On the other hand, there are certain developments like, how the shtetl becomes the paradigm par excellence, and it becomes very idealized as imagining all of Jewish life in all of Eastern Europe, not just in Poland, before World War II. And that's really an international phenomenon. It's very interesting. I want to ask you one more question. I think then we're going to get questions from our audience. And that was, how has Yiddish provided points of contact, not only internally among Poles and Jews living in Poland, but Jews coming from elsewhere in Europe or United States or Israel, or also between Poles and other Europeans who aren't Jews? And what role has Yiddish played there?
Thank you for this question. It's an important question. So for many Jews coming to Poland, Yiddish is part of their heritage. So engaging, seeing what happens with the Yiddish in Poland was important to them. One thing is, for example, we have an international summer seminar in Yiddish language and culture, and there are people who come to Warsaw precisely because they have connection to Poland, and they want to have this connection also through Yiddish. So that's one thing, and for some it's very important. And moving some. Whatever happens with Yiddish in Poland, it's moving, and it really touches on like a personal. Whatever, I'm missing a word right now. I'm very sorry. I was thinking in Yiddish and French before this meeting, so you have to excuse me. A personal note. So this is one thing. Then, of course, international projects and international cooperation in the academic sphere, which is kind of obvious. Though Poland is really famous, and Poland and Europe, which might be surprising for the American audience, is really, has this tradition of like gigantic editorial projects where you invest public money in series that are 30 volumes. My university edits is like a whole series of autobiographies, Jewish autobiographies, translated not only from Yiddish, but Yiddish forms a very important part of the project: Hebrew, Russian, German, and Polish. But Yiddish is one of the most important languages here, and it's 30 volumes, state funded. And then there is also, some, it's Polish scholars who write introductions, but it's also international scholars. So you have these projects. My institute, so the Jewish Historical Institute, published a whole series called Yiddishland. And the first volume in this series is a translation from Hebrew of an important book about Jewish Warsaw, Jewish literary Warsaw, by Nati Cohen, professor of Yiddish from Israel. And this edition is such a beautiful thing. It's like much more beautiful than the original Hebrew edition. So we see how much is invested in this project, and there'll be a whole series of these books, scholarly books and translations. And then, of course, international cooperation in the realm of arts and theater, and I mean music probably, and that's not a exclusively Polish phenomenon. So music, especially between, for example, Poland and Germany, where there are a lot of non-Jews engaging with klezmer music and other genres of music, but mostly klezmer and klezmer reinterpreted, let's say. So this is also important, and Yiddish also seen as this, part of a European heritage, and like this international language that is an important part of European heritage that unites, that can, engender different projects on the international or European scale, in the region, meaning in Eastern Europe, but also across Europe. And here the cooperation with the French Center, which is the most important, probably. So the Madame Bibliothèque Maison de la Culture Yiddish is one of the most important Yiddish institutions in Europe as such. So there is a cooperation, for example, between Wrocław and Paris in this respect, and there were many conferences. But science is international, so academia is international, arts, so the curatorial scene is also international. So we've seen many curatorial projects, so brought from Israel, Yiddish related, not very good ones, I would say. So right now there is an exhibition in Lublin, which is a terrible exhibition. It refers to Kafka in a bad way, and to Kafka's image of, imagined Yiddish, and also it's simply artistically not very interesting. But I haven't seen many Israeli exhibitions brought to Poland, like as a whole. And there were some, of course, I'm exaggerating, but there were 2 Yiddish exhibitions brought to Poland in the last decade, which is interesting. And if I can mention, I know that this really is not the question I asked, but if we're talking about changes in, how positioning of Yiddish change in Poland in the last years, you can see this in the realm of curatorial practices. So in 2017, Poland was celebrating 100 years of avant-garde in Poland. And it's important that it was not Polish avant-garde, but in Poland. Mm-hmm. So really encompassing different cultures. Avant-garde in itself, it's an international phenomenon, but then you can nationalize it in different ways. And here, actually, there were, in the main Museum of Modern Art, which is the, not only the Polish, but the European MoMA, which is the Museum of Art in Łódź, one of the most important institutions of the kind in the region, but really comparable to MoMA in many respects. There was a series of 4 exhibitions, and one of them was devoted to a Yiddish intellectual and her theory, which was Deborah Fogel, and the art milieu around her. So, and this is incredible. So this brings Yiddish. When I was talking about these developments, the canon making gestures in the 1950s or early 60s, here they come back and they redefine how we think. What is the history of Poland? How do we understand it? What do we include and what do we exclude? And how do we engage with it in a way that it does not get Polonized? That this is a part of a complex network of history, identities, languages, etc., etc., etc. The same happened a year later in the National Museum in Warsaw. Regrettably, the curator and the acting director of the National Museum was later fired. This is Piotr Rybson, but he really created an incredible exhibition about the Polish independence. It was 1918, 2018, so 100 years of Polish independence regained. And there, simply with no discussion, Yiddish art, Yiddish avant-garde journals, Yiddish speaking artists were part of this, of the story of the Polish independence. And we see it also in the way curricula are constructed at universities. We see it also this like inclusive but not possessive way of thinking Yiddish history. And there was a gigantic project concerning the history of psychoanalysis in Poland. And 10 years earlier, nobody would think we need to think whether there was this, there was something of, psychoanalytical in Yiddish. Should we know it? And here, the people who are doing, they asked the question. They wrote me and asked me, should we include Yiddish? Is there something about Yiddish and psychoanalysis that we should think about? So they might not know, but they start asking questions, and these questions are really important as well.
Now, it's fascinating to see how the different ways this is incorporated into Polish public culture as part of Polish culture, as part of European culture. It's definitely a new development. It's very exciting. And I see Elise is here. We're gonna give the floor back to her.
Just for a moment. First of all, we'll thank you formally, but thank you both Jeffrey and Karolina for an incredibly stimulating conversation. Your conversation has prompted many questions. We have chosen 3, and then we'll give you a little bit of time just to close it up. The first question is from Professor Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblett. Can you explain the communist policy, national in form, socialist in content? Why was Yiddish supported or even promoted by the Polish communist state?
Okay.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah, Barbara, thank you so much. Barbara always asks great questions.
It's like a comprehensive exam. I don't know.
So, first of all, if you have 2 Jewish languages to choose, so Hebrew was associated with the religious tradition. Yiddish was associated with the progressive traditions, with the revolutionary movement, even though, of course, this is also a stereotype. So those people also who refer to Yiddish, as a mean, to define their progressiveness, to speak, they forget about, the whole, Yiddish, those whole Yiddish-speaking masses who were religious, not super progressive, and we have this tendency to forget about it when we, we want to forward our progressive agenda. So here, Yiddish, the international language of workers, the language of the revolutionary movement, was better suited for this than here. That would be one very obvious answer. And then, of course, this was not the whole Yiddish. This was, these were Yiddish progressive traditions, or reinterpreted progressively. We saw it also in the Soviet Union with great Yiddish critics and scholars who were reinterpreting the Yiddish history. These are great, by the way, these are really great works. Sometimes, if you know how to read them, they're still valuable. And this happened to this volume. Yiddish is, Peretz is, okay, he writes about Hasidim, he writes about these folksy ways, but what is important here is that he is really, writing about the masses, about the hard-working masses, the masses that were oppressed. And he is looking at them. He's looking at Bonche, against the establishment, against the bourgeois elite. So the very bourgeois Peretz, by the way, becomes this, the socialist writer that fit the context, and it happened to Peretz. Peretz was, taken and used by many different parties, and also by the socialist movement. They wanted to have not the whole Peretz, because if you read Peretz, he tends to be super nationalistic, and he doesn't fit the agenda. But so bits and pieces were chosen to fit the main narrative. But Yiddish simply was better because, of course, also one more thing should be mentioned: the state of Israel, 1948, and the politics of the Soviet bloc vis-a-vis Israel, and Hebrew was the language of Israel. So that's yet another thing that.
Well, it seems to me, one thing to think about is the extent to which this was building on what had been established in the Soviet Union, starting I guess in like 1920s, where you had state recognition, state support, and also state control of Yiddish cultural production that had its own ups and downs, and was actually on the way down in a very scary way in the Soviet Union in the immediate post-World War II period. But then in Poland, it now has a different valence under what's now a new communist regime. So there's both that precedent, but there's also this very interesting shift if we think about what's going on in these two different countries. And there's definitely this very selective reading. Not only in the, I think this is probably true of a lot of ideologically driven readings of Yiddish literature. So, you can read Sholem Aleichem and claim him as also a great proletariat writer, or you can claim him as a neoconservative. And I've seen both. And I think Sholem Aleichem would get a good chuckle out of both of them. So it's very interesting the extent to which you get something imposed from without, that then you have people working with the culture within are working to continue to write, to continue to publish, to continue to perform, when this is the rubric in which they're expected to present things. Of course, it's not only exclusive to Yiddish. This is what's going on with everything in a country that is controlling cultural production in this ideological way.
Definitely.
Thank you both. Our next question is from JYV79. And the question is, how are figures like I.B. Singer seen in a Polish context, or Julian Tuwim in a Yiddish context?
Okay. Should I go first?
Yeah.
Probably, yeah, I should go first. All right. I.B. Singer is the Polish Nobel Prize winner. That's one thing. Every time you want to have more Nobel Prize winners in the field of literature, Poland does quite well. We have quite a few Nobel Prize laureates here, starting with Raymond before the war, but I.B. Singer is really seen in this context, as a Polish, writer in exile somehow, which is interesting, because this does not concern, I was talking about these developments, these changes, but this does not concern the whole, history of Yiddish culture, though we've seen attempts to include, for example, the history of Yiddish literature into the broader history of Polish literature, which happened abroad in Italy and Canada and the USA. So the new history of Polish literature in the 20th and culture in the 20th century, being Poland, includes also Yiddish and other minority languages, and the Italian history of Polish literature includes Yiddish as well. So this happened abroad and then was brought back to Poland. I.B. Singer is also the author of the murdered past, so to speak. And he is, reviving the past that Poland lost. So that would be another way of seeing him. But with time, if you ask younger people, they know less and less of. If you ask them who I.B. Singer was, not all of them. That's not obvious for the youngest generations that they would know. Of course, older generations do know, but. So he's not super popular, but still, if you were to ask do you know any Yiddish authors, this would be, but that's an international phenomenon, I guess. But here, really the importance of the context, the topographical context, the smells, the tastes of his work, they are also considered Polish tastes. So the experience, the sensual experience of I.B. Singer's work, although the cultural experience is different, the sensual experience, the topographical experience, he seems so close. So that's how he's read. Julian Tuwim. Well, that's quite a story, and that's actually a topic of my research, because I do research Yiddish Polish literary context, and I right now could give you a whole lecture, which I don't have time for. So die ganze teure auf einen Fuß, or auf Reglaches. So he was loved and hated at the same time. Loved for two reasons, as the central canonical writer of the Polish modernism, already in the interwar period, and hated for the same reason. Polish Jewish writer who hated Yiddish, I mean, Tuvim wrote terrible things about Yiddish. On the other hand, when he was, talking to different audiences, and that's very typical, when he was interviewed by Shin Lamet Schneiderman, a Jewish journalist and a translator from Polish to Yiddish, for the main literary magazine of the interwar period in Yiddish, the Literarische Blätter, he said, well, I don't know Yiddish. People believe that he knew Yiddish, but he didn't. But I would love to edit a volume of poetry, Yiddish modern poetry. So will you help me? So when he was addressing a Yiddish audience, he was more open to Yiddish than he was in the Polish language, where he was speaking about Yiddish as a jargon. On the other hand, he was translated already in the interwar period. His work was translated into Yiddish when he was attacked by anti-Semites in the 1930s with the rise of anti-Semitism. He was included back also by the Yiddish intellectuals who were rejecting him. Moshe Broderson, for example, an important modernist avant-garde writer, would write, well, I know Tuvim and I know Słonimski, and they don't know, me, and they ask me, they know me, but they don't know my culture. And they ask me, why are you so crazy and you're writing in this language of black hats? Why do you do this? Why, if you know our culture, Polish, why do you marginalize yourself? This is a trope that comes back in many other reviews and cultural practices. And then, Broderson attacks Tuvim for this reason. And then in the 1930s, we see, when Tuvim is attacked, he's really defended by Yiddish intellectuals as well. So even though they hated him, they felt a need to protect him, to defend him. And then Yiddish, of course, that's a more complex issue. Then Tuvim also during the Holocaust, actually, and then after the Second World War, he comes back to his Jewishness, and he's more at ease to speak about it more openly. And he publishes in 1944 this famous text, "We, the Polish Jews," and it's immediately almost translated into Yiddish. And he's attacked. He's attacked by Golom, for example, a very important secular Yiddishist, who says, "Well, now you come back. You have no right." So there's this also this shock that comes with the Holocaust, and Tuvim becomes more interested. He meets Itzik Manger. Tuvim and his colleague, they're all usually named together, Antoni Słonimski, coming from the famous Słonimski family. So Słonimski, who wrote terrible things also about Yiddish, even worse than Tuvim, because Tuvim was also always ambiguous. And that's why it was easier to translate him. So Słonimski also translates Manger, and they are interested in this culture of Los Städtlach, as Słonimski writes in his famous poem, and they are not very welcomed by many Yiddishists who were disappointed with Tuvim before, that he was not helping the Yiddish cause when he could. But on the other hand, Tuvim he's a famous author for children, so his poems are translated in the 1950s by Lei Politsky for Jewish children, and there is a whole edition, Tuvim for Kinder, Tuvim for children. So he becomes a part of the canon for children, for educating children, the new generation of post-war generation of Jewish kids, of educating them in Yiddish. So that's a whole story, and there's more to it, and I could speak more, but we have no time.
Well, I will just add that the language wars that people were fighting, including in the midst of a genocide, that you could still have people furious at one another because of their loyalty or disloyalty to a language. It's just very revealing about what was at stake in their investment in language. And that in the United States, we claim Isaac Bashevis Singer as an American. So it's like he has two medals in two different continents.
So we don't want to interrupt this amazing conversation at all. We have several more questions, in fact, quite a few, but because our time is coming to an end, both Jeffrey and Karolina, I ask you, would you like to please make some kind of closing comments? And we will go, unfortunately, say goodbye to you and to our audience, and looking forward to hearing much more.
I'll just say very quickly, I'm so grateful to what Karolina has shared with us, because she has got her finger on the pulse. It's really a very rich and diverse, complicated, dynamic development that I think for people outside of Poland is surprising. A lot of what people assume about Yiddish in Poland is not much, and in fact, quite a bit. And I'm grateful to hear so much about it, and just so thoughtfully. So I just want to offer my thanks to her for all that I've learned from her.
Jeffrey, thank you very much for those words, and thank you for talking to me. It's always a pleasure and fun, and I wish we had more time. And I'm so happy that we had such a great audience. So this is, to be continued. The Yiddish really, and there are a lot of Polish-Jewish debates, and important debates, and Yiddish is a part of them, but sometimes not, the main focus, but an important part of them. So there is a lot to look at, and this is really a very complex question and an exciting question as well. And so just check for yourself, perhaps, and come to Poland to see. It's really, there's a lot.
So just to, first of all, on behalf of our audience and the Toby Center, I want to thank you, Jeffrey and Karolina, for a most inspiring and thought-provoking discussion. Yes, to be continued. And yes, please do come to visit Poland, and we'd be happy to host you. Thank you, dear participants. We're grateful to all of you who already support and invite others to support our TJH Talks sessions, as they are really dependent on your contributions. And thank you to our TJH Talks team, Jakub Wyszek and Kai Shicek. And information about how to make a donation or to keep joining us or to share this information with others, you please read our follow-up email, which will include all of those details. And if you'd like to catch up on previous sessions or rewatch them, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And one more last comment. We look forward to seeing you at our next session on November 17th. Dobranoc. Good night. Laila Tov. Good Nacht. Is that close?
Gute Nacht, ja.
Gute Nacht from Warsaw. Thank you all.
Hi.